Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Product Angle Show. Today we have someone special. We have Linda, who is a PM turned solopreneur. She has built products at Fair, Patience at Snapchat, spreadsheets, and storytelling at Bain. Linda writes a weekly newsletter at productlessons.xyz and is a recovering TikTok addict. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you, Pradeep. What an intro.
Hey, thank you for being on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Now tell us how you started in product management first.
Yeah, it was kind of a long, winding journey. So I first learned about product management back in 2015 when some of my friends were getting APM roles, but I already had a consulting job at that point. So I was like very all in on consulting. But after a few years, I knew I wanted to be in tech and actually be in an industry that I enjoyed. So I joined Snapchat, and that's when I started noticing that within a tech company, there are people who do the making, right? The design, the coding, the managing of the products, coming up with ideas. And then there's everyone else who basically supports that. And I was very much in the supporting role. And I realized that I actually wanted to be in where the action is, where the PMs are, so to speak. And so I started looking into roles at earlier stage companies where I would be able to do more things. And so I found this tiny startup called Indigo Fair at the time. It's since rebranded to Fair and become a multi-billion-dollar company. But I joined as early on as the head of product analytics, if you will believe. Did that for maybe a few weeks, and then it became very clear that there was a business need for PMs, like actual PMs of the company. And so I became a PM pretty quickly after that.
Got it. Well, I saw your post on negotiation, and negotiation is one of my near and dear topics. So I reached out to you, for you to be on today's show, and I'm super excited to talk about negotiation. So before we get started into your story of how you negotiated that 375K salary, how do you think about or define negotiation?
Yeah, I think that negotiation actually starts the moment you start looking for a job, the moment you start talking to companies and potential employers. And the reason why I say that is because the moment you begin those conversations and you start getting to know people, people are like sizing you up and figuring out, what are your motivations? Where are you in life? What is it that you want to get out of this next chapter? And they already start like collecting signals on what would make you happy, what would make them happy. So negotiation is often associated with like the last step of, oh, what number did I get? What am I working for? But really the seeds of the negotiation actually start from the very beginning.
Absolutely, I agree with you. Now, where do you fall on should everyone negotiate their salary offers?
I think it's definitely case by case. The first thing to remember, though, is that when a company first gives out an offer, almost all of the time, like the offer is much lower than what they are expecting to pay you, or that they would be willing to pay you. And the reason why that is because they expect people to negotiate. Unfortunately, like the rules of the game have already been set in a certain direction. And understanding that is crucial. So the first number you see is never really the number that that they expect you to get to. So that's like rule number one. But even with that said, I think it really depends on your specific situation, because sometimes, and this is me very early on in my career too, sometimes you can't negotiate. Like when I went into consulting, the compensation was set. Right. So everybody got paid the same amount because it was a standardized program. And the point of getting into a program like that is you get a lot of training, you get to learn, you get to meet cool people. So you don't negotiate because you can't.
Yeah.
There are other instances where it's your dream job. Like this is what you want to do, and you probably do it for free. So the fact that they're willing to give you any money at all is a miracle. And so in that case, maybe you don't negotiate because you want to make sure that you can, like, you're so thankful already. But I think that as you gain more skills, especially unique and valuable skills, that are going to create a lot of value for your next employer, for the people around you, it makes sense to negotiate, because it's not just about the number. I think at the end of the day, it's also about being recognized for the value that you bring. And a negotiation is a window for other people to see how you do research, how you make arguments, right? And what could you do for that company if you're really good at negotiation? Like, that's actually a really good sign of seniority. So I think that especially as you start accruing skills, like, a negotiation is just a thing that it's a skill that's really useful. It's not purely just a financial perspective, but also from communication, like, how do you present yourself perspective? How do you boost someone's perception of you? Negotiation is actually pretty key to all of those things.
Absolutely, I love everything you said. I can't stress how important or how I am attached to the negotiation. It's something that I enjoy, and it's near and dear to my heart. But I want to pick on something you said, that it's like a dance that recruiters are expecting you to negotiate at times, right? So what would you say, how, or if you've experienced this, or what your thoughts are? What if the recruiter says to you, if we were to give you $10 for, let's say, argument's sake, right? If we were to give you $10 as your annual salary, would you accept it? So they're not giving you that room to negotiate right now. How would you handle something like that?
Yeah, so I'll give you an answer, but before I give you an answer, I think there's maybe two things to highlight there. The first is the use of the word if. So it's not a real offer yet. There's nothing written. It's a hypothetical. The other is, would you? Like, this is all very much it's not a real life situation. And so knowing that, I think the way I would respond would be, I'm thrilled that, an offer potentially could be on the table. And I think when we, assuming there is a good fit at the end of this process, I'm happy to talk about, what would make sense for you and for me. But for now, there's not a whole lot to go off of. And so I think when you're put in a situation where it's purely hypothetical and it's very early on, I think it's better to defer your judgment than to say yes or no on the spot. Like, maybe the goal is to get you to say, oh yes, I would do that for $10. But I think before you get to the end of the process, before you have anything in hand, it's better to not give anything either way, because it anchors you down. And also, even if you said yes, it doesn't mean they're going to get the offer, right? So it's better to not give your cards away, I think, immediately.
No, I appreciate that. What would you say to someone who feels bad about negotiating in salary, right? I mean, they're giving me $10. I should be grateful, maybe that in this climate that I'm able to find a job, or in any climate. What would you say to somebody if they're feeling a little bit bad about negotiating, or they feel that it's greedy to negotiate?
Yeah, I mean, that was me for a really long time. Like, I was really uncomfortable with negotiation. It's still kind of an awkward conversation to be having with someone, because it feels like, oh, we're going to be working together, so I don't want you to think negatively of me. But what I've learned in my experience, having done this a few times, it actually benefits you. Like, if you do it well, people have a better perception of you after you negotiate than if you hadn't negotiated at all. And it kind of goes back to what I said earlier around the fact that, one, there's an expectation that you do negotiate. It's possible that this changes based on the company and the culture. So, definitely figure that out. But at least in the US, for sure, and probably even in Canada, the offer that's given out is a lot lower than what they're actually plan to give you, because they think that you're going to negotiate anyway. So if you don't, you're leaving money on the table. Is that okay? I think it depends on the individual. Some people are fine with that, especially if they get to work with these people, and that's okay. But I think it's important to know what you're okay with, because if it's going to bother you and you're going to keep thinking about the money you left on the table, and it's going to be something that you think about all the time, or you hear about, a coworker making a lot more and they're doing the same thing. This happens all the time in companies, and it bothers people so much that it hurts their day-to-day performance, because they're thinking about these things that they feel like they were nickel and dimed, et cetera. And so that's why it's important to actually speak up when you have the opportunity to, so that you're not left wondering what if, or why is it, or why can't I? It's better to just take that action up front. And I think the thing to remember is, if you're going to say these things in a certain negotiation, the most important thing is to have integrity about it. Like if you make certain promises, like I will take an offer at this amount, which is what I did with Instagram, you got to stick to it, right? Like if they actually give you the number, like you should plan to sign, and you should be honest about the promises that you're making. But I think if you do it with transparency and you give people reason as to why you're asking for a certain number, whether it's because you have a competing offer, whether it's because you have an existing offer that's higher than what they're willing to offer you, then I think people are very open to hearing that and making exceptions. And I think it's also a good way to see how the other party thinks about problems, right? Because it's also your window into what that person might be like to work with, how this company functions. And so that's an important signal. Before you sign with a company, you kind of want to learn more about them, right? Because you don't actually have a lot of time to really get to know the people that you're working with. And so the negotiation window is actually a pretty good way to learn more about, whether this is going to be a good fit for you.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you. I mean, I remember a time when I wanted to work with a particular manager, and the HR person picked up on that and offered me 20,000 less than what initially we talked about.
Wow.
Because I was so excited to work with this one particular manager, and I gave away all my cards because I just wanted that job, and I would work there just to be with that manager and learn from that manager. So after that, I realized, you know what, you gotta hold your cards back a little bit. So that was a big learning experience for me.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting example. I'm sure it was still probably worth it to work with that manager, yeah. But it goes to show you that, the company has a lot more information than you do. So it's important to try to keep advantages to yourself.
Absolutely. And I did later realize that even if I asked for that 20,000 plus more, they had it budgeted in. But I just was too excited to work with this one person, and I completely disregarded the entire process.
Wow.
But you learn from your mistakes, or you learn from your experience rather, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've made tons of mistakes like that too. I think especially when you're put on the spot and you've never been asked a certain question before, I think our need to be liked and to be accepted by the other person can put us in tough positions. But, like you said, you make the mistake, you realize it was a mistake, and you hope to never make it again.
Yep, absolutely. Now, I'd like to move on to prep work. So in one of my workshops, I heavily stress that the more prep work you do before the actual conversation, negotiation, the better you are at understanding the different aspects and the different angles that are in the negotiation. What are your thoughts on prep work? And before we move into your offer at Instagram, what kind of prep work did you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think the first thing is you kind of have to understand how that company structures compensation. So in my particular case, I knew that Facebook, Instagram, they have a leveling system. So after the interviews, if they decide to give you an offer, they determine your level based on your experience, based on your performance. And then you can actually look up what the compensation band looks like based on that level for that role for that particular location. So you actually get like aggregated data from out there to figure out whether the offer they give you, like where that sits on that spectrum of possibilities. So that's the first thing of just like actual number gathering. I think that there's also, and this is something that I try too, of if you know people at the company, if you know people who used to work at the company, you can get some information on what their negotiation process looked like, what were the exceptions potentially that have been made previously when it came to these particular types of roles. And then I think the other thing that's actually really crucial, because it gives you confidence, is you want to understand when the person says yes, like they want to give you an offer, there's still a spectrum. There's like soft yeses, there's strong yeses, there's really strong yeses. And you want to know where you sit on that spectrum, how they perceive you. Because if you're a super strong yes, like they have already figured out the perfect role for you, and there's very few other people that they believe in the pipeline who can fill that role the same way that you will, that gives you a lot of room for negotiation. Whereas if you barely made the cut, and the performance, the interview feedback was like good but not stellar, and you can kind of sense that they're like not super excited, but they're definitely going to still give you the offer, then I think that you can lean less on upfront negotiation and lean more on ongoing negotiation once you are in the company and you've proven yourself and you've shown that you can bring a lot of value. So I think it really depends on where you sit, what that system looks like of how they determine negotiation, and then getting some anecdotes from other people to see if there's any specific nuances about that company that you should keep in mind.
Got it. So with the spectrum of yeses, would you suggest negotiating once you have it in writing, or once it's a strong yes verbally?
I mean, at least in my instances, I've always waited until I've actually had something in hand, because before that, you never really know what's going to happen. Like, people could have their budgets pulled, the organization could change, right? So I wouldn't go so far as to start negotiating before the written offer, because it also signals again that you're so keen on closing this that, again, it kind of like exposes you in a way, right? So I would probably wait.
Got it. So then going back to my other question, what if you get to the end and it looks like you're going to get an offer in writing, but just before that, you hang up that call, Zoom call, whatever it may be, they ask you that one last question. If we were to give you X, would you accept it? And, you pretty much have a soft yes, and it's just a case of that question, plus you're going to get something in writing in the next 24 to 40 hours. Would you change your decision at that point? To the response you gave me earlier?
I think I would phrase it differently, but I don't know if the direction would change. I think I would say something like, wow, I really appreciate the offer. I'm super excited to look into it. And once I have it in writing, I'll take a really close look and talk to my family and my friends, and definitely get back to you as soon as possible. I think deferring is still a good thing, because you never really know what's in the package, because the package is more than just the number. There's, like, in a private company, there's the equity clauses of, like, when it vests, if there's acceleration at all, vacation days. Like, there's a lot more to the package than anyone can possibly tell you on the phone in a really quick phone call, right? So there's always more, and because there's always more, it's important to be excited. Always be excited, right? Be thrilled that you get this opportunity, and you're looking forward to it. But you gotta look at the fine print.
Yep, definitely. I agree with you. So as we move on to your offer at Instagram, and if I read correctly, you got an offer for 300,000, and then you negotiated it up to 375. Now, what gave you that courage to negotiate all the way up from 300 to 375? Because most people would have just been happy with the 300,000. They get to work with a FANG company, and they would have been more than happy just to accept it right there and then.
Yeah, I mean, so I went through kind of the steps that we just talked about. Of first, I was like, interesting. Let me see what the internet has to say about this. And I noticed that the L5 compensation band for a PM role in that location, 300K was like on the lower end of it. And so I was like, oh, okay, I think there might be room for negotiation here. The second thing was, I had a job, right? So I wasn't looking for another job. So that actually puts me in some ways in a more comfortable position, because they came to me, right? The door came knocking, I just answered it. And I looked at the offer that I already had, right? The company that I already had, and most of the compensation was way towards equity, but the equity was already very valuable at that current valuation. And if you apply a multiplier to it, even if you discount by time, et cetera, it was still worth a lot more than the offer that I was being given. And so I was like, from a even comparison point, as well as from a pure data benchmarking perspective, this isn't the most attractive offer. And I also knew from talking to the team that there were reasons why they were super excited about me. One of which was, I mean, besides the interview feedback, it was also the fact that, you know, I had written about TikTok before. I was an avid TikTok user. I clearly had a keen interest in the space, and it was the Instagram Reels team. So it was just like a confluence of factors that were in my favor. And so because of that, and because I knew people who worked there, right, who have gotten higher offers and in certain situations, I knew that, you know, I was in a position to negotiate.
Got it. Now, I'm assuming since Instagram is Facebook, you had the product sense and the execution interviews first, and then the leadership interview. So just walk us through those three phases that you went through before having that conversation with the recruiter about your salary.
Yeah, so it was actually a very quick interview process compared to the ones that I'm familiar with running. Our process was a little harder, but yeah, the first round is one product sense, 45 minutes. Another is execution. It's usually back to back, so you have like an hour and a half with PMs at the company.
Yep.
And then assuming you pass that, you go to your second and final round, which is the same thing again, but different questions: product sense, product execution, followed by leadership and drive. So this time it's like, what is it, like an 45 times 3. So it's a little bit longer. And then I think a week after that, or maybe a few days after that, they were much faster towards the second round. They get back to you with an answer. And usually they'll tell you, we're excited to give you an offer, but it won't be in writing until like maybe a little bit later. And then you wait for the thing in writing and you evaluate.
Got it. So walk us through that conversation with that recruiter. Was it just a case of they called you up and said, hey, we're excited to have you, and you know, you'll get an offer in writing in whatever period? Or was there more than that? Or walk us through the, you know, that conversation.
Yeah, I think that the recruiter called and said something along those lines of like, we're excited to give you an offer. It's going to be like 300,000 or something like that. And then you kind of just stay silent for a little bit. You gotta just wait. And then I think it was something along the lines of, oh, what do you think? And so I was like, well, I'll look at it in writing. But just so you know, like I'm leaving a lot of money on the table with this company if I were to join you, et cetera. But like, there's nothing that you can do really in that first call, I think, because both sides are still like, the details are being worked out, right? And so they have to kind of send that first offer to you first before any of the ensuing negotiations starts. But I think they sent it to me afterwards, and then I think I emailed them back with like the fact that, you know, like, having done the research, having thought about this a little bit more and talked to people around me, I think that this offer, I mean, I'm excited to work with you guys, but this offer, you know, is just not where it needs to be.
And then did you set up another call and had that conversation? Because from what I read on your article, they were very excited and they had senior managers calling you and different members of staff calling you because they were excited about getting you on board. So talk us through that process.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think it was anything special for me. I think that they actually probably do it for most of their candidates, especially if, you know, it's a strong yes and the person hasn't accepted yet, right? So it's probably a thing that they do for everybody. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, they everything's funneled through a compensation team. So there's this group of people that you never meet, you've never spoken to, who I think are supposed to do the check and balance of making sure that people are given offers that can be justified based on their level, their experience, their existing offers, et cetera. And so the recruiter is the person who brings it to you and who is like your mediator, but they're not the person making the final call. I thought that the hiring manager would be able to make the final call, but I was mistaken. So I think the hiring manager has some influence over the process, but I believe the compensation team still has the final say. That may not be true for maybe more senior roles, maybe or maybe not, right? But at least in my case, it was very clear that they would have been willing to do any of those things because frankly, they were spending more money talking to me than they would have needed to if they just gave me what I asked for. So I am pretty sure that the compensation team held it back. And so I think looking back on my particular situation, what could I have done better? I think the first thing was I did not do my own math properly. So when you are leaving a company to join another company and you're leaving a private company, you should also factor in the cost of exercising your stock options. So in my case, like it was going to be a very big price tag, and I did not account for that in my negotiation. If I did, I'm pretty sure I would have gotten exactly what I needed, if not more. So that was mistake number one. I did not do the math properly on my side. Mistake number two was if you're really intent on getting the highest possible offer, get competing offers. There's no other way around it. Like herd mentality is going to drive up the valuation of you as an individual, just like it drives up the valuation of startups that have multiple investors bidding on them. Like let's look at Clubhouse as an example, right? If you were Clubhouse as a person, if you had multiple offers and you're the hot person in the school, like everyone wants to be with you, and so your valuation could go through the roof in a way that seems pretty crazy. So that's an exaggeration, right? Like you're not going to be like, that's not what I'm saying. But if you get competing offers, you absolutely will get a higher offer. And I think even in the process, they had asked me whether I had competing offers. And I was very open and honest the whole time of like, look, I was never looking for a job. Like I haven't pursued anything because I'm not looking to leave actually, but I could make an exception for Instagram because of the team and various other factors. But I knew that they wanted me to have a competing offer because then they could close me with the number that I wanted. So that's kind of unfortunately the game that a lot of especially these bigger companies have set up. And so if you want the number, learn the rules of the game and do a bunch of interviews and actually orchestrate it to work for you if that's something that you care about.
Got it. No, that makes sense. It's a dance that you have to play to get where you need to be. Now, in your article, you put that you had chosen the 400K number. Was that your effective walking waypoint? Either once you put it out there, either you match it or you don't accept it. And the way I understood the article, you didn't accept it, correct? Because they never got to that $400,000 range. Yeah,
correct. They never did. I think that I think what they told me was they wanted to get there, but without a competing offer, the compensation team could not do it. So really all I needed was a competing offer. Or what I needed was to do the math properly and say, oh, actually, I need this much money to be able to leave because otherwise I can't leave. That would have been, another big payday if I had gone through that process.
Got it. Now you write your newsletter at productlessons.xyz. How much leverage or influence do you think your newsletter had in the interview process? I mean, did they find you through your newsletter, do you think? And how much impact did that have, do you think?
I don't think that they found me through the newsletter. I'd be surprised if they did. Because I'm pretty sure the recruiters have their own system and it's not really reading people's newsletters, probably not the best use of their time. But they did find an article I wrote when I got the offer already. They found an article I wrote about TikTok months earlier. I wrote about TikTok like very early on during COVID when I was definitely an addict. And so I was reflecting on why I was so addicted. I was talking about the specific product features that they did well and just like the interesting phenomenon that was TikTok, especially when lockdown first started and we were all so captive and all that. And so that certainly had an influence in that I think it cemented their conviction that I would be a great fit for their particular team. And I also think that, a lot of times once they give you an offer, they're looking for reasons to say yes, to like just close the deal, right? Because interviewing and recruiting and all of that, it's very time consuming. It's very expensive. It's honestly kind of draining. I've been on the other side before. I've hired people and it's very, very difficult. So when you find someone who's a strong yes, and then you find more signals that they could be a really strong yes, you kind of just take it at that point because it just confirms your own beliefs already. And so, yes, it did help, but I think it was kind of random.
Fair enough. Now, what are some of the resources you use to compare salaries? You mentioned L5, and were there any particular websites that you used or any particular resources that you can suggest?
Yeah, so levels.fyi was what I used. And the others, were friends, people who worked at the companies or did work at the companies. Those are probably the two biggest things. I've read plenty of stuff on negotiation previously, so I didn't really need a refresher there. And I think I was also, I just wasn't that nervous about it because I knew what I was, I knew I had something good going for me, even if I didn't take the offer was the icing on the cake for me. And so I used it almost as a way to kind of just learn more about the process. And, I certainly was planning on joining had it all worked out, but I'm no crying over spilled milk, no need for that. So it's all good.
Yep. No, fair enough. What are some of your favorite negotiation resources if you can remember any off the top of your head?
I actually don't. I think that there was a book I read a very long time ago. Something like Never Split, something Chris Voss, I think was his name.
Never Split the Difference, yeah.
Never Split the Difference. I think I read that a long, long time ago, and maybe subconsciously it influenced me. I do think some of these books can be helpful, mostly to show you that it's possible and that there are some things that you can say that can either help you buy time or help you buy confidence. But at the end of the day, I think that it really just comes down to trying and experimenting and building leverage for yourself. Like if you have valuable skills and you have a proven track record over time, and no one's born with that, right? Like you get it over time by hard work and working with people and taking opportunities and being underpaid, maybe in certain instances of your life. And you get to a point where you have a lot more leverage. And then when you're at that point, then you kind of get to do what's fun for you. So if you want to negotiate, you can negotiate. If you don't, you don't have to, but it's a good place to be.
How did you practice your negotiation skills? Because obviously, in my opinion, reading a book isn't enough, right? It's easy to read a book, but how do you actually practice those skills before your interview?
Helpful. Yeah, I think it's helpful to write things down in advance. So if you're going to be in a call and they're going to ask you tough questions, I think writing down what you would say is useful because sometimes when you write things down, you realize like, oh, that's a terrible response. Let me revise it so that I sound more competent, right? So I think writing can help because it's a mirror. It shows you what you really are. And then you realize, I don't want to be that. So I'm actually going to change certain words. I think that is a helpful way to prepare, especially for people who I think are like for me, I'm more of an introvert. And so it makes me feel better when I've written certain things down. And I think for other people, it might be helpful as well. So there's that. I think there's also just like, interviewing. If you interview regularly, you put yourself in a position where you get to iterate on what works, what doesn't. And also when you do it often, it is time consuming, but if you do it often on a regular cadence, then you you're just more comfortable with it. It's not as if this one thing is going to be a make or break moment for the rest of your life. And so when you can remove that fear through exposure, you're just in a better position to do it and to actually have fun and not, see it as a life or death situation.
Definitely. What are some of the things that you should not do in a negotiation?
I think the first is to shoot yourself in the foot, right? I think there are some people who are really nervous and who don't really believe in what value they can offer. And so I think when you're in a negotiation and you say things like, oh, I was so surprised that you gave me this, or I'm like, I didn't know I could get the offer, something along those lines, that sounds really bad because it makes them question whether they should have even given you the offer. Because confidence starts with you first. So don't shoot yourself in the foot. if someone's giving something to you, they're doing it for a reason. And especially if it's a company that has had hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of these reps of interviewing people, making offers, not making offers, the odds of them making a mistake is actually pretty low. So just take it, right? Take it graciously and know that like people are giving you this for a reason, and have confidence in yourself. It's another reason why you should believe in yourself. So that's probably the first thing. Don't shoot yourself in the foot. The second is don't make promises that you can't keep. I think that there, you know, with these negotiation games, it is possible for someone to get ahead in the short term by making promises. Like, let's say I had 5 competing offers and I told each of them, or I told one person, I'll sign a 400K. I'll tell another person I'll sign a 600K. I could do all these things, right? And it's not, I don't think it's illegal per se, right? I could have just changed my mind, but it might get you a good offer in the short term. However, I think in the grand scheme of things, it's a small world, and it's not really worth destroying your integrity and your reputation just to get a little bit more money in this particular job. So I think negotiating with integrity of like, if you're going to make promises, well, first of all, don't make promises unless you actually feel really certain about it. And then if you do make it, stick to your word, and no one's going to be upset with you about it because you said exactly what you were going to do.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Integrity is so important. It's easy to play the bluff game, but having that relationship is more important than having a few extra dollars, or lying through your front teeth just to get something in the beginning. So thank you for sharing that. I have a couple of questions here from the audience. Are you okay to take a few?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so first one is from David Cho. He says, "Hey Linda, thanks for doing this. During the first round with the recruiter, would you recommend sharing your salary expectations? If so, how would you phrase them? If not, why not? Thank you."
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that it is worth doing if you believe that it will get you a better offer. So I have done it in the past when I was negotiating with like a very small company, a startup, and I was working for like a bigger company that I knew could pay me more. So that way we're not wasting time. Like if this is truly out of their range, like out of all possibilities, then it's better to like not go through the charades of interviewing and then realize, okay, we're completely on different pages. So I think it makes sense when it's useful in your particular situation, but most of the time, I don't know if it really makes sense, because oftentimes you're changing a job, a role, because you're looking for a step up, right? So anchoring on your previous salary, on your previous package, only locks you into the past, but you're trying to walk into the future. So generally I would say no, but only if it helps you.
Yep, absolutely. And David, I don't know where you are, but in New York City, it's illegal to ask your current salary. Okay, another one here from Michelle. How do you go about finding the right rocket ship opportunity to build skills and grow quickly, and assessing trade-off between a lower salary plus higher growth prospects?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's something that I definitely had to do at a number of points. I think that it depends on your goals. A few years ago, I just felt like I could be doing more in my job. So when I was at Snapchat, it was definitely a cushy job. I was getting paid well, especially for the hours that I was working, which is not that much. And I just felt like I was coasting and that I wasn't learning as much as I could have. And so my number one goal was to get into a smaller company where I could learn a lot and do a lot, because there just weren't that many people to solve the number of problems that they had. And typically small startups are good for that. But I think the thing to keep in mind is the expected value is never going to be, like, in terms of money, the expected value is probably not going to be as high as working for like a big company where there's guaranteed payments, guaranteed equity that's liquid. So rocket ship is really like you're either going up or you're going to implode. And so the way I thought about it was, if I could find people that I really respected, and that I believed I could learn from, that would be worth it for me. Because even if it blew up, which was probably the most likely scenario, that it just wouldn't work, we would go bankrupt or something else would happen, I would still learn a lot, and that I would still get so much out of the opportunity, compared to, coasting somewhere else where I didn't want to be for the rest of my life. And so that's kind of how I convinced myself that it was okay to take this risk. But it is a risk, and not everyone at every single point in their lives can take that risk, because the numbers don't quite really work out. But if you find people that are really smart and that you want to learn from and work with, especially early on in your career, I definitely think it's a good way to get a lot in a short amount of time.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Linda, it's been awesome. Thank you so much for chatting to me about negotiation and the experience. Before we end the session, any final thoughts or actionable items that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would say that, for everyone listening, like, this is already the first step towards, negotiating and finding the career that you want. I think the first is just like doing the research and knowing that it's possible. And hopefully after this call, people realize that it is possible, and that oftentimes it just takes a little faith in yourself, and building the skills that you need to be doing. But anyway, people can find me on Twitter at the Linda Zhaang. I also write every single week at productlessons.xyz.
Yep, absolutely. If you haven't followed Linda on Twitter, go ahead and subscribe to her newsletter. Linda, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who joined in today.